On a stormy night, 4 friends decide to explore the ruins of an abandoned prison famous for its macabre legends. What begins as an exciting adventure soon turns into a living nightmare when the doors mysteriously close, trapping them inside the decaying structure. As the hours pass, they discover they are not alone. The tortured souls of the prisoners and guards who died there seem to have awakened, thirsty for revenge. The rain relentlessly pounded the asphalt as Lucas's old Chevrolet snaked along the winding road. In the passenger seat, Mariana nervously adjusted the map on her phone, the bluish light illuminating her tense face. In the back seat, Rodrigo and Camilla exchanged apprehensive glances, the silence between them broken only by the howling wind and the incessant drumming of the rain on the car's roof. "Are you sure this is the way?" Lucas asked, squinting through the drenched windshield. "According to the map, yes," Mariana replied, her voice betraying a mix of excitement and fear. The Shadowgate prison should appear right after the next curve. As if summoned by her words, the car's headlights illuminated a rusty sign. Shadowgate State Prison, decommissioned. The letters, almost erased by time, seemed to warn visitors to turn back. The quartet had planned this adventure for weeks. Amateur urban explorers, they sought the thrill of exploring abandoned places. But Shadowgate was different. The stories surrounding the prison were more than urban legends. They were whispered nightmares. Built in the early 20th century, Shadowgate gained notoriety for its brutal regime and countless unexplained deaths. Prisoners went mad in solitary confinement, guards committed suicide at their posts, and illegal experiments were conducted in the basement. The prison was hastily closed in the 80s, leaving behind a legacy of horror that time could not erase. When the imposing iron gate loomed ahead, partially engulfed by vegetation, the 4 felt a collective shiver. The grey concrete structure rose against the night sky like a sleeping beast, its dark windows like empty eyes watching the intruders. "We're here," Lucas announced, his voice barely a whisper. They got out of the car, the fine rain, now a cold mist, clinging to their skin. Equipped with flashlights, cameras, and naive confidence, the 4 approached the gate. "Last chance to back out," Rodrigo joked, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his own nervousness. Camilla, always the bravest, stepped forward. "We came this far. We're not turning back now." With a creak that seemed to echo through the night, the gate gave way to her touch. At that moment, as they entered the prison yard, none of them could have imagined the terror that awaited them. The next 12 hours would change their lives forever, if they survived to tell the tale. Darkness enveloped them, bringing with it the inescapable feeling that they were no longer alone. The Shadowgate prison, dormant for decades, seemed to awaken to receive its new guests. The air inside Shadowgate prison was thick, heavy with the weight of decades of abandonment and dark secrets. The beams of their flashlights cut through the darkness like blades, revealing endless corridors and rusted iron doors. The quartet advanced cautiously, their footsteps echoing disturbingly in the sepulchral silence. "Look at this," Mariana whispered, her beam of light illuminating a wall covered in deep scratches. "They look like claw marks." Lucas approached, running his fingers over the marks. "Impossible. No one has the strength to scratch concrete like this." A chill ran through the group. Camilla, trying to maintain composure, suggested, "Let's check out the cells. There must be something interesting there." Following the main corridor, they soon found themselves in front of a row of cells. The time-corroded bars creaked in protest as Rodrigo pushed one of them open. The interior was a macabre tableau of abandonment, a rotten mattress, a rust-stained sink, and on the walls, "My God," Rodrigo gasped, his voice trembling. Their faces, dozens of faces, had been carved into the concrete wall. their expressions frozen in silent screams of agony. The technique was surprisingly detailed, as if each line had been etched with desperate precision. Camilla, always the most curious, entered the cell to examine it more closely. That's when she noticed something faintly gleaming under the mattress. She bent down to retrieve the object. "It's a diary," she said, flipping through the yellowed pages. Before she could read anything, a deafening crash echoed down the corridor, making them jump. It was as if all the doors in the prison had slammed shut simultaneously. "What was that?" Lucas asked, his voice barely disguising the growing panic. At that moment, the temperature seemed to drop drastically. The air became so cold they could see their own breaths. And then, in the ensuing silence, they heard something that chilled their blood, a low, guttural whisper coming from all directions at once. "Welcome," the voice said, "to your judgment." The flashlights began to flicker erratically, casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. And there, in the reflection of a broken mirror on the opposite wall, Mariana swore that she saw a dark figure watching them, a malevolent smile on a face that wasn't entirely human. When the light stabilized, the figure had disappeared, but the feeling of being watched and the certainty they were not alone remained, heavy and suffocating like a shroud. "Guys," Camilla whispered, her voice barely audible, "I think we made a terrible mistake coming here." Little did they know that this was only the tip of the iceberg of the horror awaiting them in the depths of Shadowgate Prison. Panic quickly set in among the four friends. Exchanging terrified glances, they unanimously decided it was time to leave. Camilla put the diary in her backpack, ignoring the icy sensation emanating from the object. "Let's get out of here. Now," Lucas commanded, his voice trembling slightly. Retracing their steps through the dark corridor, the group moved urgently toward the exit. The sound of their hurried footsteps echoed off the walls, mingling with other indistinct noises, whispers, scratches, distant moans that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When they reached the main hall, a terrifying sight awaited them. The heavy iron door through which they had entered was closed. Not only that, it seemed to have been welded to the frame, as if it had been that way for decades. "Impossible," Rodrigo muttered, running to the door and pushing it with all his strength. "We were here less than an hour ago." Desperate, Mariana began searching for other exits. There must be another way out, a window, a passage, anything. But every window they found was barred, every secondary door locked or blocked by debris. It was as if the building itself was conspiring to keep them trapped. Suddenly, a metallic, deafening noise echoed through the building. Internal gates began closing on their own, one after another. The sound of metal against metal, reverberating through the corridors like a mechanical scream. "We're being cornered!" Camilla shouted, the fear evident in her voice. The group ran frantically, trying to escape the labyrinth of closing doors. They turned one corridor, then another, until they found themselves in a wing they hadn't explored before. There they found a staircase leading to the basement. "Down!" Lucas shouted, already descending the steps. Barely had they reached the bottom when the door at the top closed with a final thud, plunging them into near-total darkness. Panting and trembling, the four friends huddled in the cramped space, the weak light from their flashlights barely illuminating their terrified faces. "What's happening?" Mariana sobbed, tears of fear streaming down her face. At that moment, a low, constant sound began to fill the air. It was like a hum, but as it grew louder, it transformed into something more. A voice, or several voices, chanting in unison an ancient and sinister melody. "Welcome to our domain," the voices chanted, seeming to come from the very walls. "Here you will pay for everyone's sins. 12 hours of judgment await you." Survive if you can. The chanting ceased, leaving only the sound of the friends' racing hearts. They were trapped, isolated, and at the mercy of forces they could not comprehend. The next 12 hours would be an ordeal that would test not only their courage, but their very sanity. Trying to stay calm, Lucas lit a lighter to get a better view of the surroundings. The trembling flame revealed a passage ahead, leading into the unknown depths of the prison. "We have no choice," he said, swallowing hard. "We can only move forward." With hesitant steps, the group ventured into the unknown, knowing that each step took them deeper into the heart of the terror now holding them captive. As the group advanced through the subterranean corridors of Shadowgate Prison, the air grew increasingly dense and cold. The smell of mold and decomposition filled their nostrils, making them gag. The once white walls now displayed dark stains that seemed to move under the trembling light of their flashlights. "Look!" Rodrigo exclaimed, pointing to an inscription on the wall. The letters, apparently written in dried blood, formed a disturbing phrase. "Here lie the forgotten. May their screams echo for eternity." A low, prolonged moan echoed through the corridor, freezing them in place. It was not a human sound. It seemed to come from all directions at once, as if the very walls were lamenting. "We need to keep moving," Lucas whispered, his voice betraying the fear he felt. Turning a corner, they encountered a grotesque scene. A translucent figure hovered in the middle of the corridor, the ghost of a prisoner, his grey skin marked by open wounds and empty eyes that seemed to stare into nothingness. Mariana stifled a scream. Clutching Camilla's arm, the spectre slowly turned its head towards the group, its lips moving in a twisted, toothless smile. "Fresh meat for the slaughterhouse," the spectral voice reverberated in their minds. "Come, little lambs. The butcher awaits." With a sudden movement, the ghost advanced towards them. Panic seized the group, and they scattered, running in different directions. Lucas and Mariana found themselves in an old interrogation room. Rusted torture equipment still adorned the walls, dark stains on the floor silently telling stories of past suffering. "We need to find the others," Mariana panted, trembling uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Rodrigo and Camilla had taken refuge in an abandoned cell. The diary Camilla had found earlier began to vibrate in her backpack, emitting intense heat. "What's happening?" Rodrigo asked, watching Camilla retrieve the object. When she opened the diary, the pages began to turn on their own, stopping at a specific entry. The handwriting, previously illegible, now glowed with a supernatural light. June 18th, 1963. The experiments continue. The prisoners scream day and night. I can no longer distinguish the living from the dead. The director says we are close to opening the portal. God help us, for we have invoked something we cannot control. A high-pitched scream echoed through the corridors. It was Mariana's voice. Camilla and Rodrigo exchanged terrified looks. "We have to help them," Camilla said, putting the diary away. As they left the cell, the corridor had transformed. The walls pulsed as if alive, and shadows danced at the edge of their vision. Voices whispered promises of eternal torment, as spectral hands tried to grasp them. Shadowgate Prison had fully awakened, hungry for new souls to torment, and the night had only just begun. The next hours promised to reveal horrors beyond human comprehension, testing the limits of the four friends' sanity and survival. As they ran towards Mariana's screams, Rodrigo and Camilla had no idea of the nightmares that awaited them. The true terror of Shadowgate was about to reveal itself in all its macabre glory. Mariana's scream echoed through Shadowgate's winding corridors, guiding Rodrigo and Camilla through the labyrinth of horror. With each step, the prison seemed to change around them. Doors appeared where there had been none. Corridors stretched infinitely, and shadows took on a life of their own. Turning a corner, they came upon Lucas, who was dragging a semi-conscious Mariana. "What happened?" Camilla asked, running to help. "Something attacked her," Lucas panted. "A thing. It wasn't human or ghost. It was like it was made of shadows and teeth. They found temporary refuge in an old infirmary. While tending to Mariana, Rodrigo noticed something strange on the walls, nearly imperceptible arcane symbols etched into the peeling paint. "Look at this," he called, running his fingers over the inscriptions. They looked like formulas. Camilla, remembering the diary, pulled it from her backpack. The pages moved on their own again, revealing drawings identical to the symbols on the wall. "It says here," she read, her voice trembling, "that these symbols are part of a ritual, something about opening portals to other dimensions." A metallic sound like dragging chains silenced the group. From the corridor they heard heavy footsteps approaching. "Quick, hide," Lucas whispered. Barely had they hidden when the door opened. A monstrous figure entered, a being that seemed to have been stitched together from pieces of various bodies. Its features a mask of eternal agony. "I smell your fear," the creature growled, its voice a cacophony of muffled screams. "You can't hide from me. I am the jailer, guardian of the condemned." The group's hearts beat so loudly they feared being heard. The jailer sniffed the air, turning its deformed head in all directions. "Ah, there you are," it laughed, sound that made their blood run cold. In the panic of the moment, Camilla noticed that the symbols on the wall had begun to faintly glow. Without thinking, she pressed her hand against them. A blinding flash of light filled the room, and when they could see again, the jailer had disappeared. Where it had stood, there was now a secret passage. "How did you do that?" Rodrigo asked, wide-eyed. "I don't know," Camilla replied, looking at her hand, which now bore marks identical to the symbols on the wall. "It's like the prison responds to me." Mariana, now more conscious, spoke in a hoarse voice. Maybe that's why we were brought here. We're not random victims, we were chosen." The revelation hung over them like a dark cloud. They were connected to Shadowgate in some mysterious and terrible way. "The diary," Lucas said, picking up the object. "It must contain more answers. We need to decipher it." As they ventured through the newly discovered passage, the group felt a shift in the air. The prison seemed to be watching them with a new intensity. They were no longer mere intruders. They were key pieces in a cosmic game of horror. They were only beginning to understand. As they delved deeper into the bowels of Shadowgate, a sinister certainty settled in. To survive and escape, they would have to unravel the prison's hidden secrets, and each discovery would bring them closer to the heart of the darkness pulsing at the center of that accursed place. The clock kept ticking. There were still several hours until dawn, and the horrors of Shadowgate were far from over. The group advanced through the secret passage, the damp walls covered in a viscous substance that pulsed as if alive. The air grew denser with each step, laden with the weight of centuries of suffering and malevolence. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast circular chamber. In the center stood a structure resembling an altar made of black stone, surrounded by pillars covered in symbols similar to those Camilla had activated. "My God," Mariana whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this?" Before anyone could respond, a deafening roar echoed through the chamber. From the shadows emerged a colossal figure, a monstrosity that seemed to have been ripped from the deepest nightmares. Its form constantly shifted, sometimes resembling a tortured prisoner, sometimes a cruel guard, and at times a grotesque mixture of both. "Welcome," the creature thundered, its voice reverberating off the chamber walls, "to the heart of Shadowgate." Lucas stepped forward, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. What are you?" The aberration laughed, a sound that made the ground shake. I am Shadowgate. I am the sum of all the suffering, all the cruelty, all the injustice that occurred within these walls. And you, it pointed a deformed finger at the group, are the keys to my freedom. Camilla felt the diary vibrate in her hands. When she opened it, the pages lit up, revealing a previously hidden text. The final ritual requires 4 pure souls, corrupted by fear and despair. Their essences, when sacrificed on the central altar, will break the chains binding the entity to the prison. "We're not your puppets," Rodrigo shouted, his fear turning to anger. The creature only smiled, its teeth a row of sharp blades. "You have no choice. You were marked the moment you entered here." With a gesture, the aberration caused chains of dark energy to rise from the floor, wrapping around the 4 friends and dragging them toward the altar. As they struggled against the spectral bonds, Camilla noticed the symbols on her hand glowing in sync with the pillars around them. A desperate idea formed in her mind. "Guys," she shouted over the creature's roar, "we need to activate the pillars. It's our only chance." Understanding the plan, the group fought to reach the pillars. As they touched the symbols, a light began to emanate from them, growing in intensity. Realizing what was happening, the aberration roared in fury. "No, you cannot deny me my freedom." But it was too late. When the last pillar was activated, a beam of pure light burst from the altar, piercing the chamber's ceiling and extending into the night sky. The creature howled in agony as its body dissolved in the light. The chamber walls began to collapse, and the ground shook violently. "We need to get out of here," Lucas shouted, pulling the others toward the exit. Running through the collapsing corridors, the group fought to escape the imploding prison. Behind them, they could hear the agonizing screams of the trapped souls finally being freed. When they finally reached the outer courtyard, the sun was beginning to rise on the horizon. Exhausted and panting, the 4 friends watched as Shadowgate prison crumbled, taking the night's horrors with it. But as the walls fell, an unsettling feeling remained. They had survived, yes, but at a cost. The marks on their hands, the nightmares that would haunt them, the knowledge of what truly existed in the shadows. These would be their burdens to bear, and in the wind blowing through the rubble, they could almost hear a whisper, "Until next time." The long night of terror had ended, but its echoes would remain forever. The sun rose on the horizon, painting the sky with blood-red hues as Lucas, Mariana, Rodrigo, and Camilla watched the smoking ruins of Shadowgate prison, exhausted and in shock. The silence following the implosion was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional noise of settling debris. "Is it over?" Mariana asked, her voice no more than a hoarse whisper. Before anyone could answer, a violent tremor shook the ground beneath their feet. Fissures began to open in the courtyard, emanating a spectral light and searing heat. "It's not over," Lucas shouted. "Run!" The group launched into a desperate sprint towards the main gate. Behind them, the ground continued to disintegrate, swallowed by a supernatural abyss that seemed endless. As they ran, horrifying visions assaulted their minds. Flashbacks of the atrocities they had witnessed during the night mixed with images of even worse horrors that seemed to come from the abyss itself. Camilla stumbled, almost falling into one of the fissures. Rodrigo grabbed her arm, pulling her back. For a moment their eyes met, and both saw the terror and determination reflected in each other. "Almost there!" Mariana shouted, pointing to the gate, which now seemed impossibly distant. The air around them grew denser, filled with spectral whispers and laments. Ethereal hands emerged from the ground, trying to grab their ankles, as if the tormented souls of Shadowgate refused to let them go. Lucas reached the gate first, pushing it with all his strength. The rusty hinges protested, but finally gave way. Come on, he shouted, holding the gate open as the others passed through. When the last of them was through, Lucas let go of the gate and ran. The metallic clang behind them sounded like a final seal, separating them from the horror they had left behind. But the escape was not yet complete. The ground beyond the prison walls began to deform, trees contorting into impossible shapes, shadows gaining substance and pursuing them. They reached Lucas's car, piling in hastily. The engine roared to life, and they sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. In the rearview mirror they saw a surreal scene. Shadowgate Prison, or what was left of it, being swallowed by a vortex of darkness, taking the surrounding area with it. It was as if a piece of reality was being ripped from the world. Miles passed before they dared to slow down. The silence inside the car was palpable, broken only by panting breaths and occasional muffled sobs. Finally, when the sun was high in the sky, Lucas pulled over to the side of a deserted road. The four got out, their legs trembling, and looked at each other. They were alive, but forever changed. The marks on their hands, physical reminders of their ordeal, pulsed softly. Camilla's diary, now seemingly inert, weighed heavily in her backpack, as a tangible reminder of the secrets they had unearthed. What do we do now? Rodrigo asked, his voice laden with exhaustion and residual fear. Camilla looked at the horizon, her eyes carrying a dark knowledge. We live, she said simply. We live and remember. Mariana nodded slowly. And we prepare. Because something tells me this, she gestured vaguely to their marked hands, isn't over. Lucas turned on the car radio, searching for any news about what had happened, but there was nothing. No mention of earthquakes, explosions, or mysterious disappearances. It was as if Shadowgate had never existed. As they got back into the car, ready to return to lives that would never be the same, each of them knew, deep in their newly scarred souls, that their fight against the darkness was only beginning. Shadowgate Prison had fallen, but its echoes remained. And somewhere in the shadows between worlds, something watched and waited, hungry for its next chance to emerge. 6 months had passed since that fateful night at Shadowgate. Life, as always, went on. But for Lucas, Mariana, Rodrigo, and Camilla, nothing was the same. Sitting in a bustling city cafe, far from curious eyes, the four friends met for the first time since the incident. The contrast between the normalcy around them and the horror they carried within was almost surreal. Have you been sleeping? Mariana asked, her eyes marked by deep dark circles. No one answered immediately. It wasn't necessary. The nightmares, they knew, were a constant for all of them. Camilla absent-mindedly fiddled with the diary she never left behind. The pages, once filled with dark secrets, were now blank. But sometimes, on the darkest nights, words would briefly appear before fading away, like whispered warnings. I found something, Lucas said, lowering his voice. Reports of similar incidents, other places, like Shadowgate. A chill ran through the group. The idea that there were other locations imbued with the same evil was terrifying. Rodrigo looked at his hands, where the symbol's marks still glowed softly. They're getting stronger, he murmured. It's like they're calling to us. The ensuing silence was heavy, laden with unspoken understanding. They were no longer just survivors. They were guardians of a terrible knowledge, sentinels against a darkness few knew existed. So what do we do? Mariana asked, her voice trembling slightly. Camilla closed the diary with a sigh. We prepare, she said, echoing words she had spoken months earlier. We study, train, strengthen ourselves, because if there are other places like Shadowgate, Someone needs to be ready to face them, Lucas finished. The four exchanged looks, a silent pact being sealed among them. They had survived the unimaginable, and now they carried a responsibility that went beyond their own lives. As they rose to leave, each felt the weight of what lay ahead. The world around them continued to turn, unaware of the shadows lurking at the edges of reality. But they knew, and they would be ready. Outside the cafe, a shadowy figure watched them leave. Its eyes, deep and ancient, gleamed with a knowledge beyond human understanding. A sinister smile formed on its face as it murmured to itself, "The game has only just begun, my young pawns. Only just begun." The cold night breeze carried its words, a harbinger of what was yet to come. The battle against Shadowgate's darkness had ended, but the war was far from over, or just the beginning. The saga of Shadowgate's survivors is just one of countless horror stories hidden in the shadows of our reality. In every abandoned city, in every old building, there are portals to unimaginable horrors waiting to be awakened by those unaware enough to cross their thresholds. Lucas, Mariana, Rodrigo, and Camilla escaped, but at what cost? And how many others at this very moment are about to encounter the unspeakable? Stay tuned for the next tale from Draven Nocturnus, where new nightmares and macabre revelations await those brave or foolish. Enough to delve into the depths of the unknown. The boundaries between our world and the realm of darkness are thinner than we imagine, and the consequences of crossing them are always fatal. Until the next night of terror, dear readers. And remember, sometimes the true horror isn't in what we find, but in what we bring back with us.